Kim, thanks so much for taking the time to chat. Do you want to quickly introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Kim Libreri. I'm Chief Technology Officer at Epic Games, helping drive the engine and all the real-time stuff we do at Epic and a bunch of the demos that we've done. And then prior to that, I had a film career for 20 odd years. Some of the highlights being Lawnmower Man 2, Job's War, and I'm trying to think, Catwoman, that's another one that was on the, and then also the Matrix trilogy as well. So
I was chatting with Peter Chang, who was one of the founders of DNEG recently, and yeah, I had to throw it out there, like, going all the way back to working on his one Thomas the Tank Engine episode that he ever, I think assistant DP'd something like that on the project. So, we've all got a few of those lurking around. I got Superman and a few things that I'll, try to vary wherever I can.
Hey, it's a visual effects and service industry. You try to do the best work, whatever the film is.
That's right.
You're not ultimately responsible for the final edit on the movie, so
I didn't write the script is usually what I say. Obviously you've got more of a technical background. Did you always imagine you'd fall into some kind of computer graphics industry when you got older?
Yeah, so when I was a little kid, I was sort of into art and computers. Before I got my first computer, I think at like 10 years old. I got an Atari 800 that my dad bought me. We didn't have a car in the household, so that's how we could afford an Atari, because I'm sure people were like, Atari 800? It was an expensive computer, but he actually had no car, so I think he spent all his money that he would have put into a car to buy me a computer. And that got me into the beginnings of computer graphics. And when I went to university, I'm like, well, I think at some point you're going to be able to paint pictures that look totally real inside a computer. So that's why I sort of specialized in computer graphics.
That's cool. And I'm curious too, like, how did you first get involved in visual effects?
So it goes back to university. So at university, I studied computer graphics. I loved the idea of making three-dimensional images that could one day be indistinguishable from reality. And I also loved video games at the time. And it felt that my passion with 3D graphics was just not going to be achievable in video games. So for people who don't know me, I'm reasonably old. I graduated in 1989. So you can imagine 3D computer graphics in video games was not really much in that day and age. A little bit of vector graphics in a few games and some really basic rasterized flight simulators. And movies, well, I didn't quite realize that they were about to make this leap until I bought Tom Smith's Industrial Light and Magic book. It's got all the amazing work of the original Star Wars team and my friends back at ILM. But then there's a chapter that talks about Wall-E, which is the animated short that the Pixar team, while they were still, I think they must have been still at Lucasfilm, put together to show off what their graphics computers could do. And I'm like, there you go. That's the beginning. I want to be part of that journey. And I think that filmmaking actually is probably the place, because inside a computer, we're not restricted by the laws of physics, that it may be an actually really great place to sort of entertain people in ways that they've never been entertained before, and to have visuals that you've never seen before. So that's why I sort of wanted to go into the film business. But, I come from the north of England, simple town called Leyland, and the chances of making it into Hollywood, it seems like a distant dream. But I got pretty lucky when I was at university, the final couple of years, I was specializing on programming these things called transputers. And transputers were actually used a decent amount for graphics work. And after university, I started work at a company called AMS-Neve, which actually is a music business. And ended up doing the graphics for a digital mixing console for mixing film audio, mixing film scores on. And actually, if you go to Skywalker Ranch, even to this day, they have a bunch of these machines that I worked on 30 years ago, where if you go into a special secret place and type Kim, it goes into demo mode, which is kind of creepy.
Awesome.
It's still there 30 years later. But anyway, so I did that, and I really did want to try and get into film. I'm from the north of England. I was working in Burnley, which is in Lancashire in the north, not far from Manchester. And I'm like, well, maybe I'll go to London and see what it's like. And I found a job agency, and they're like, what? Computers, movies? What are you talking about? No, it wasn't computing with them. Anyway, 6 months later, they ring me up. And it's like, you're not going to believe this. We just got approached by a company called the Computer Film Company that makes movies with computers.
Which nobody would know what that is anymore.
Yeah, exactly. So that was CFC, which CFC got bought by Sir William and Framestore, and they sort of got merged into one. It was actually, I think it's quite complicated. Dan Glass talked about it, I think, in one of your previous episodes. But anyway, I did an interview, and they're like, "Wow, a real computer programmer that knows graphics." And my boss Wolfgang Lemp hired me, and that was it. I was in the film business.
Yeah, it sounds really straightforward. That's for sure. Do you think in a lot of ways, like, I'm just kind of curious in regards to that, like a lot of people might think like, you know, Hollywood, let's say, is Hollywood and it's all the way across the pond. But for you, do you think it is a bit of taking the initiative to try and get out there and, you know, see what opportunities are there, as well as timing, luck, and everything else in between?
You know, luck does get involved in your career at many areas, but you got to hunt stuff down. You've got to be hungry. You know, breaking through in an industry, and you've got to think. Remember, like, you know, early 1990s when I made the move from AMS to CFC, there was so little visual effects. You know, ILM was pioneering. Jurassic Park hadn't come out. I don't even know if The Abyss had come out by then. Maybe just about. It was really an unknown. The potential of what it was going to be wasn't really well known. And CFC, you know, they weren't doing much 3D stuff at the time. In fact, it was almost all 2D. But you have to be persistent, and, you know, and also find your niche. You know, now it's a very different industry from what it was in the early 90s. You know, there's probably, I don't know, there's probably hundreds of thousands of visual effects artists now employed in the industry. Then, you know, the only company doing serious film work at all in London in the computer was Computer Film Company. There was Peerless Camera Company doing opticals, but for computer stuff, it was pretty much us. You know, and this is why I was able to make the leap, is that I was a software engineer, and in that day and age, there were no tools. There was no Maya or Nuke or anything like that. I sound like a really old git, by the way. There was none of that stuff. So you had to write it. And, you know, one of the things that actually it's carried through with me all the way through to Epic was, you know, the software engineers, which was me, and the artists, which is my friend Yannick Sirs. I don't know if you talked to Yannick. He's a big hotshot supervisor. Well, he likes to think he's a big hotshot supervisor. Spider-Mans and Marvel movies and stuff. We basically were a team, and I'd write code for him. He'd try it out, and everything was brand new, but it was all on our own hardware. We basically would build our own hardware, our own file systems, and it's worth, at some point, you should do an episode talking about how Computer Film Company ran the disk array. So, you know, nowadays we have fancy network attached storage. Actually, we have cloud storage nowadays, but in that day and age, our images for compositing were stored on a bunch of hard drives, and they'd be lined up in a row, 4 of them. One would be the red hard drive, one would be the green hard drive, one would be the blue hard drive, and one of them would be the alpha channel. And because there was no networking, that we crappy Ethernet from, you know, the early 90s, if we had to move images from our film scanner to our compositing stations, the GIPs is what they were called, for graphics image processing systems, you'd sneak in it. You'd basically, we learned the hard way. We didn't have Pelican cases at first, and they would get dropped, and then the shot's dead, and then you've got to start again. But then we'd have these Pelican cases that you'd be carrying with the red, green, blue alpha discs in them between floors.
Throwing a brick the blue channel by accident.
Crazy. It makes me sound really, really old, but it was crazy times, but it was exciting. I'm sure when you talk to the old school computer graphics people at ILM, everything was new. There was a sense of pioneering, and actually in this, you know, beam forward to what we're doing in real time now, it has that same feel of like you're solving problems that you couldn't solve before. And now we have this added advantage, is that people are interacting with that imagery and that artistry in a way that only you could do in the real world in the past. You could never move a light quickly and see the results immediately in front of your eyes like you can now.
Even having a shaded viewport, like, you know, even in the 90s, like late 90s, like a shaded viewport was like a whole blessing. You know, it's unheard of at the time. So,
oh yeah, I remember, you know, when we were doing What Dreams May Come and The Matrix, we're like, oh, let's output the Z buffer and the surface normals, and we'll write a little plugin for Shake that does some basic lighting. I can't even remember. I think Dan Papone used to call it cheese light. And this is a real tool that we had on the Matrix. Like, I want to adjust the lighting a bit as a compositor, and I don't want to ask the lighting person to output anything again because it took 3 days to render just really crap graphics. It's very funny. It's a very different world.
So I'm kind of curious too, like, how has the industry changed from early days to now? Like, as you were mentioning, there's a huge scarcity. Even, let's say, 96, 97, you mentioned visual effects. Like, the special effects was still the argument of like which is what at the time. And a lot of people didn't really know until things like Jurassic Park in '93 came out, or Toy Story in '95. Like that's the first time you could really point and say that's the kind of stuff that I'm trying to do or am doing. Whereas now, visual effects is synonymous with being the problem for every single film, even though half the time it's the practical set that is what they're pointing to. But how do you think it has changed in terms of like smaller studios usually taking on a portion of the work versus all the work, or smaller shot counts, or less ambitious?
I think there's a difference in terms of how the visual effects artists and studios get treated. I think in their early days, ILM, set a very good template. And as you say, you can watch the Disney Plus series that gives you the background of the birth of it, and you can see they were just a bunch of really smart people that were quite rebellious and doing crazy stuff that George believed they'd actually get there. And I think that relationship they had with George and Spielberg and Kathy, and how they propagated this sense of respect for visual effects, was very much for every visual effects company in the mid to late 90s, where you were effectively considered magicians. And it was really, I think directors would be like, wow, it's so special that I can work with these artists to get these results. One of the first movies I worked on was Muppets Christmas Carol with my friend Yannick Serres.
Awesome.
And Brian Henson, his dad had passed away, and it was Brian's first proper, big directing gig. And, we made Kermit walk, which was a miracle for the puppet guys, that we were able to take I think we had him obviously we had him on blue screen. We weren't so dumb to put him on green screen, but we had him on blue screen, and we were able to get rid of the puppeteers and put him on there. And it was almost a tearing up moment for Brian, and the level of respect that he had for us. And you can see everybody that came to the shop was like, you're doing magic. I could not tell this story any other way. And this continued through the Matrix and the late 90s and early 2000s. And it's one of the reasons that, we as a group, we ended up, after the first Matrix, we just kept working with Lana and Lily, because there was just this mutual respect and trust in terms of the filmmaking process. It's just that now there's so many companies that do it. The budgets are tight. Visual effects is such a huge part. It's just evolved to be, a large percentage of the pixels in any blockbuster are digital at this point, that that level of involvement with the visual effects companies just it's just not quite the same. That's one of the reasons why, not to take this all over the map in a discussion, but one of the reasons that we were driven in the engine to get real-time technology into that place is that I felt that the spontaneity that you would have, with physical effects or physical traditional shooting, sort of gone, and visual effects become this very convoluted, complex process. And you'd find yourself, you supervise, so you find yourself on a set, and you could tell half of the crew were like, what the beep are we doing? This doesn't make any sense. And you try your best to get the green screen coverage or blue screen coverage right, and then the director's changing his mind when he frames it, and you're shooting off the green screen, and everybody's looking at you, and it's just this weird, they just think of us as aliens that are on the set. And then iteration is really slow. I think the visual effects companies' pipelines have got better and better, but it's still an overnight turnaround for most shots to make tweaks, and you can't really do it in front of the director's eyes. And I just felt that industry is almost like out of respect to my previous job, and the fact that I think that all media types are going to converge over the next decade, I thought, well, let's see if we can help. And it really did. It wouldn't have really, I don't think we would have had such adoption without Jon Favreau's help. And if you go to any of these LED volume stages, and particularly with Mandalorian at the beginning, you just see a crew that is like visual effects and lighting, and everybody's together as one, and the results are instantaneously in front of their eyes, and it just so much more context. And it's like, finally, respect for visual effects, they're considered to be a normal part of the crew, and somebody you can rely on to make awesome stuff as you're making the film with everybody who's the normal crew's present. Even though I think there's been a bit of a darker period, although the industry's booming, is making lots of money and everybody's busy, I think that finally the visual effects teams are beginning to be respected as a super deep integral part of the creative process, even at the beginning of a film. You look at previs now, and it's so good. It's so good what they can do when they're previs in the engine, that it helps the director actually make those choices. It means there's a good template, and because it can be connected to motion capture and live camera work, you can have spontaneity in your previs now. So I actually think that even though the scale is scary, the deadlines are scary, the budgets are tight, I think I see a glimmer of a revolution that really is just going to make the industry much more harmonious and fun to work in.
It's really exciting because you're right. Like I remember even going back to the 90s, like the only time I go to sleep is when I hit render, and the estimated render time is what I'd set for my alarm clock. You know, is essentially you're in a sleep while you render, and you're going to wake up and keep iterating. And you know, I think it was kind of like comparing 3D to, let's say, someone in a flame suite who's going to sit there with a client in real time and work in action and knock out shots. I got excited about virtual production purely for the concept that it wasn't post anymore. Suddenly you're getting people in who are VFX, but it's for pre-production, but you're also on set. So it means that you get to collaborate instead of this hypothesis of, hey, like it could look like this. You could actually work with other creators in brainstorming what they wanted in real time versus it being a, well, use your imagination and we'll come back in 3 months.
You know, and they also see your challenges. Like used to be the, you know, because it's sea of green, they don't care. They don't care what's there or the fact that lighting isn't really going to match what you're going to put there in the background. Or, but now they see it. It's like, oh, and the, you know, the great thing about the LEDs is that even though there are some technical challenges in terms of the amount of light they can make and the ratios that you can get out of them and the color accuracy, it sort of brings together the traditional DP because they always add a little bit of extra light to get a bit of extra kick, get a little bit of skin tones, and you can see the visual effects team. You know, my friend Richard Bluff, you could just see him and the DP and the production. They really are a team, and it's not the usual. Well, that's your budget. Let's just throw it over the fence and not worry about it until post production when half of the production's gone at that point.
Your problem at this point, yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's really exciting, and yeah, I can't wait to nerd out about real time. I guess, like, just to talk a little bit about earlier in your career, obviously Matrix being one of those iconic things that when people think visual effects, especially in the 90s, that definitely is one of those staples. For you, how did you first get involved with that film?
So I was in the UK, as I said, working at a computer film company. You know, I love CFC. It's just everything was on proprietary hardware, and as a software engineer at the time, which was my job, and you end up with a burden of technical debt and code on your back. And one of the challenges about making things in production, which is, you know, I'm always amazed about our engineers at Epic, how they get through this, because they actually write really high quality code that is available on the internet within hours of them checking it in, which I don't think I could deal with that stress, but they do. But at the time, I just, working on proprietary hardware, having to design our own hardware systems, our own backup systems, our own file systems, it was just too much. And what I really cared about was the audience experience and showing audiences images they've never seen before. And Kodak at the time and my friend Ed Jones had decided to set up a visual effects studio in London called CineSight. So that was all going to be Silicon Graphics machines. So I didn't have to worry about file systems and graphics APIs because that already existed. And there was commercial software for the things as well, including Cineon, which was Kodak's compositing system for those old enough to remember, the granddaddy of all the node-based compositing. Well, the granddaddy that was really film. There's some arguments about other systems, but we won't go into that. You know, like a lot of English people that love films and love technology, I was drawn to come to California at some point. And I have a good friend, Nick Brooks, a fellow visual effects supervisor, that had moved to Mass Illusions in Massachusetts. And they were working on a couple of shows. So it was What Dreams May Come was first and The Matrix was second, but they landed both of them simultaneously in terms of the award. But the movies, they were sequenced. Unfortunately, Matrix started before What Dreams May Come was finished, which caused all sorts of headaches for us in terms of crewing because we're a little tiny company. But he's like, hey, look, we've got these projects. And I had been talking to him about optical flow at the time. I think I'd seen him at SIGGRAPH, would have been SIGGRAPH 96. And he's like, look, we have this, mostly we're talking about What Dreams at first. He's like, we have this show and we're going to go to Montana and shoot live action plays. And then they want to turn it into a painted world. How the hell would I do that, Kim? And he knew that I was a pretty good visual technologist. And even though I was CTO at CineSight, I'd also started supervising shows. Another challenge in them early days is to really push the envelope. It was obvious that you had to be the visual effects supervisor to go, well, make this bet and it's going to pay off. So software engineer ended up being a visual effects supervisor. And so I've got a little bit of an art background, and I think I've got a reasonable eye, but it was the only way to really push the envelope at CineSight. And I've been doing that, and he knew, and I'm like, well, this is what I would do. There's this new stuff that Kodak's doing called optical flow. And what it is effectively a tracking system that tracks every single pixel in an image. And what you could do is you could take your photograph calculate motion vectors for every single pixel, a frame at a time, and then use that to drive your impressionistic paint strokes to follow that image. And also it has the added advantages that because it's tracking everything, you can actually use it to track computer graphics into the scene. So I hooked them up while I was still in London working at CineSite, because I was part of Kodak at CineSite, with this experimental software called, oh my gosh, CineSpeed. And they did the first test for What Dreams May Come. And then Matrix, you know, they couldn't put enough still cameras in an array to get the fluid slow motion effect. So they had to interpolate images. And that's what it was built for, that system. You know, it was okay because it wasn't like working from one facility and talking to another, because it was all Kodak and we were trying to promote the technology anyway. And then he just said, look, we're going to film these things in, we're going to film What Dreams May Come, the stage work in Alameda in California. I'm like, California? You mean where Atari and Silicon Graphics are, and where Pixar is, and where ILM is? Yeah, I'll do that. Yes. So, you know, I like my really good friends, and we're all like, a lot of the founding people at CineSite were still very, very close to each other. But I had this dream always since a kid of moving to California. So we came to California. We worked on What Dreams May Come. I ran the technology team. You know, I had my friend Dan Paponi working on it, and George Bushakov, who worked at, he'd been under Debevic at Berkeley, helping on the Campanile movie, which was the big photogrammetry reveal, image-based rendering thing. But we had Pierre Jasmine and Pete Lewinowitz. Pete, I think, had worked at Apple beforehand, and Pierre is just this genius. He thinks very differently. He brings very wired, very differently for a technologist, incredible artist. And we just built bespoke software. I don't think, other than the early days of ILM or Pixar, I don't think so much bespoke software has ever been written for one movie that never really gets used again, which I think is incredible art. That's where the art of computer science and the art of visual effects and filmmaking really came together on that to produce a look that, you know, I don't know if you've ever heard the rumors. At one point, Mass Illusion, or Mass Illusions as it became, was having a little bit of trouble finishing, and the studio was a little bit nervous that it was not gonna get this movie done, and they shot the block around everybody, ILM, DD, and everybody would like, they did what? You're doing this movie this way? Oh my God, that's amazing. No, we can't do that. So it was, you know, with the long slog, we finished it. But that was sort of my introduction to California. And then the next movie, you know, as we were finishing What Dreams May Come, my job on the tech was pretty much over. It was down to the artist then to finish it. And Matrix was coming really quick. John, who is an amazing visualist, and you know, one of the secret weapons of working with John is that he's not deep in the technical details in the slightest. So quite often you find yourself with these crazy challenges that you've got to solve because John thought they were possible, even though he doesn't know how to do them. And that's where we ended up on Bullet Time, and you know, trying to get it from the test that they'd done with this optical flow stuff to actually something that could be good enough to put in a movie was something that needed my attention and needed the team's attention. So that's how I got into Matrix. Working on that movie, you know, we had a bunch of traditional visual effects artists. And if you remember, just before Matrix, or a few years before, Keanu had done Johnny Mnemonic. And it wasn't well accepted by either the visual effects community or the film community. Oh, another Keanu Reeves virtual reality movie? Oh my God, this is going to be terrible. And we all believed in it because Lana and Lily, we had early cuts. John was super collaborative. We were doing previs, I think PLF had done some of the early previs for the movie, and then every bullet time shot was done by a guy called Dan Clem inside our production team at Mannix Visual Effects. Mass Illusion went to Mass Illusions, went to Mannix. It was all the same continuum of people. But
heard plenty of stories in between that to escape and all the fun things that we won't get into, but just navigating the business or visa side of things for a lot of that stuff. But yeah, it sounds like there was, a lot of history there.
There's a lot of history, and the challenge was, we were doing things in ways that nobody else in the visual effects business was doing them at the time. We deployed an equal balance between artistry and computer science. And although all visual effects companies had, decent engineers, we were so bold in the stuff that we were deploying. Especially when you look at Matrix Reloaded, digital humans, image-based lighting, volumetrics, global illumination, ray tracing, like crazy. It's like a laundry list of SIGGRAPH papers for the 10 years leading up to the point we made that movie. We just had a very different way of working. And, you know, the artists really became one. Like, you know, we were like a family. So going between all them projects, it was this continuum of people that knew how to work together and knew how to not be afraid to do new things. You know, working on the first movie, it was very hard to get crew. Like I was saying, nobody wanted to work on it. Nobody wanted to work on The Matrix. It's so funny because people I see years later, and I'm like, you remember that interview that we had and you pretty much gave us the finger? Well, The Matrix turned out to be a big deal. And they're like, yeah, biggest regret. And like somebody, big shot supervisor, I think I know her, yeah, I'm not going to say what her name is, ended up going on to Wild Wild West instead of Matrix.
I'm sure everybody on that movie has regrets about being on that movie.
It was difficult because the storyboards, you know what traditional stuff, well, actually it's changed a lot since Matrix, but in the old days, you know, storyboards were pretty much sketches, yeah? And they were purely to convey motion and camera and not really lots of detail. But then you get this, you know, we'd get this binder of comic book storyboards that you'd never see on a normal movie. You wouldn't see it. So people straight away is like, oh my God, people don't know what they're doing here. This is totally different. The bullet time stuff itself, which was my responsibility, along with my friend Rodney Iwashina, God rest his soul, passed away a few years ago. We had to run a very complicated process to get, you know, and remember, bullet time wasn't shot on digital cameras. It's shot on film. And anybody who knows stills film that is a motion picture person knows that they're not pin registered. So trying to get 122 cameras worth of stuff that doesn't flicker, that doesn't shake, that doesn't have crazy vignetting all over the place, that has to be repositioned because we're doing nodal tilt overrides, crazy complicated. And, you know, there's a Bible. It's actually Rodney Iwashina, his wife and kids are the guardians of that book. There's only one copy of it. I've never read a copy of it, but it's 100 steps in how to do a bullet time shot. And people would just, the very small team of artists that we had on it would complain continuously, except for, and you might have talked to him, Tom Proctor, he's a supervisor. I think he's at DNEG in London.
Yeah, he was on the podcast, I think right around the same time as Dan Glass, just coincidentally.
It's all the old posse. So Tom,
I know, right?
Tom turned 21 on Matrix. And the reason we knew him is that I was very close to Kodak, and they're like, oh, we have this young kid that went to Rochester Institute of Technology and he wants to get into visual effects, and he's been a Cineon support technician, which means, you know, somebody puts in Cineon's got a bug, can you fix this, or how do you get this to work? I'm like, sure, I'll take him, we'll see if he's good. And I put him on bullet time. The iconic shot of Keanu or Neo, you know, falling backwards on the rooftop, dodging the bullets, is done by a 21-year-old that had never done a visual effects shot in his life, where I'm basically teaching him how to composite, writing code at the time, working with my friend George Brashokov. George, there's even more crazy stuff. People are going to be like, oh, Kim's crazy. But the craziest thing, George Brashokov, who was the kid that we'd hired from Berkeley, who'd been part of DeBevic's team when they did the Campanile, he was responsible for all the virtual environments. So the photogrammetry, the reprojection, the working out how we do all the view-dependent reprojection and stuff, a little bit with help from a guy called Dan Paponi, but he was Bulgarian. The company we worked for at the time somehow managed to not renew his visa, and he had to go back to Bulgaria. So the backgrounds for the iconic bullet time shots were rendered and generated in Bulgaria, which at the time, internet wasn't really a thing for Bulgaria. His dad worked at a chip design company, reverse engineering Intel chips or something. I don't know what they were doing in Bulgaria at the time. And they were the only ones that had a modem in his city. So it was crazy, Bill. Exabytes being shipped. You know, Bill Collis was involved in that movie. So because we were doing a lot of optical flow interpolation, you know, I had a network of people back in the UK and also at Kodak, and we needed better quality optical flow to interpolate between the positions of the still cameras, because, you know, our bullet time ramps up slowly. It's a slowly dolly ramp into the shots. So there's loads of interpolation in there, and to do that, we needed better optical flow. So we contacted a company called Snell and Wilcox in the UK, and they're like, oh, we have this student intern guy that is working on a software version of optical flow. Do you want to see if he can do something? That's Bill Collis, the legendary guy that worked with Simon and the team at the Foundry to grow it into the company that has Nuke and turned into the amazing visual effects entity. Bill did the optical flow interpolation for the first Matrix.
So what you're telling me is that all the iconic stuff is basically a bunch of kids who were having their first crack at working in film.
Yeah, it totally.
With a lot of guidance.
It's funny because I was watching the ILM documentary with the wife the other day with Sandra, and she's like, "Oh my God, ILM at the early days is not like, it was this crazy place with people basically bluffing their way through it and just being smart. It's just like you bunch of losers," as she said on the Matrix. Yeah. Thanks, Sandra. Thanks.
I think that's the whole exciting thing. Like, again, me being a kid from Australia, I was there's a huge disconnect mentally from like all the stuff being done in Hollywood to, you know, you're talking about dial-up. It's basically back then where you're going to VFX Pro or shipping a Cinefx magazine across the world to kind of find out what's going on. But, you know, I think in a lot of ways that is the exciting thing is when there is new technology to innovate on, it requires people to sit in a room and kind of have to hack it together. It's not, you know, it's not like you have the recipe, you got the Bible all done. It's you've got to be the one writing that and trying to figure out what works and what doesn't work 1,000 times.
You know, Australia played a very big part in that movie. It's not just that we shot in Sydney. It's just a bunch of visual effects companies, Animal Logic, D-Film. Lab was our lab. Like we were so.
I can't remember all the ones that aren't around anymore, but yeah. You know, I guess just before our movie, Dark City was the big thing in Sydney. It was awesome because the whole city, you know, I guess you were going into the millennium and there was a lot of stuff happening. Was the Olympics in Sydney in 2000 or? Yeah, it was. That's right. Because the cost of living in Sydney went up astronomically around that time.
It did. And some very nice apartments that look over the Opera House were built as well, which we shot photogrammetry from. And I'm like, man, this would be a pretty sweet place to live. Just the vibrance of the city, the excitement. Sydney had gone through like a big renaissance at that time. And it was a thing that added extra awesomeness. And when we were doing all the photogrammetry shoots and the helicopter shoots that we had to do for the movie, this amount of support we had from the local community just made the whole experience super special. Everybody at Epic is like, you're always talking about the Matrix. You're always talking about the Matrix. I'm like, it was a big deal. Not just that it was a big deal as a movie, it was awesome to make it. And, you know, we came out with the first Matrix the same year as the Phantom Menace. So we thought we were going to be completely destroyed by ILM's work on Phantom Menace. And actually, the reality is that SIGGRAPH in 1999, we got a SIGGRAPH and we're heroes. And who would have known that the underdogs would get so much praise? It was awesome. It was an amazing experience.
Just to touch back on that, like going back to what dreams become, when you were looking at shopping around any kind of overflow shots, things like that you guys had that needed help on, the fact that people were turning it down, kind of like the same thing with the Matrix, like, was it good to get that kind of reconfirmation that like, hey, we are doing the stuff that nobody wants to touch because it is so difficult, not we're struggling with this stuff and we need help? Same thing with Matrix compared to Phantom Menace. Like, how does it feel to kind of get that reconfirmation of like, hey, like we're essentially a newly created studio Mannix and we're doing stuff that everyone else is comparing to the gods of visual effects?
It was pretty awesome, and we got a lot of respect from, you know, ILM when they came to visit. They were genuinely like, oh my God. A lot of the biggest studios are built for scale. You know, there are pipeline, there are processes, and we were built to be bespoke. We'd sort of learned this on What Dreams May Come, is that, hey, we can write code, we can make tools, we can do stuff specifically to make imagery that you've absolutely never seen before and will be actually very hard to recreate. So when we went into explaining how we were doing it, and, you know, just mentioning optical flow, and, you know, that a visual effects company, if they come into this bidding meeting, they're not going to bring scientists at PhD level, Dan Paponi level, Michael Black level research scientist into the room to understand what the heck you're talking about. And you could just see brains frying, and then they see the results and they're like, oh my God, I've never seen anything like this before. So it was awesome, but you know, it's just scary as well, because we also want the movie to be finished on time. And if the studio is worried about their release date, but we did it. It was just, you know, it was crunch city to get that movie finished. What Dreams May Come in particular. Yeah,
no, it's a beautiful film. I'm curious too, like you mentioned before about John Gator, about not necessarily being the one to figure out the how. It's more about innovating with like, this is the vision. In a lot of ways, do you think that kind of helped remove any hindrance of like, think more open-minded about like, you know, I want to do this, is it possible, you figure it out, rather than thinking, well, this is going to be too difficult, let's tailor things back? Do you think having that kind of free-form thinking really helped?
It drives people, you know, people have to sit on the box and solve the problems. It can drive people crazy, yeah? And there was definitely was our moments of tension for some of the stuff that we got signed up for. But I will say, in all art forms, greatness will not be achieved without randomness. You have to have something random. You know, people are going crazy for all the AI assisted art that's being generated right now with Midjourney and all the other stuff. Yeah. And I'm like, dude, this is not that we took any of this to make the Matrix movies. We had John Gator as our random factor. But you know, the new AI stuff, it's basically, you know, what LSD was for the Beatles and all the artists in the 60s is what Midjourney now is for this new generation of artists. You have to have something that mixes up. And John, you know, his brain is wired very differently from other people's. He thinks of things differently. That doesn't mean all his ideas are good. In fact, the ratio is not what you would hope, but the ones that come through, that break through, are absolutely genius that nobody would else have thought about. And the fact that we were signed up to do these impossible things, you know, I've worked at too many visual effects companies where a lot of conservatism, because, you know, crunch is real, deadlines are hard, computer graphics is pretty hard, especially if you're waiting 10 hours a frame for something to render, and then something went wrong with the render farm or the
wrong camera,
yeah, or whatever goes wrong. So there's a tendency to try and, you know, line everything up in a row and make sure it's all sort of thought out. But the problem with that is that I don't think you can push the envelope. I think that I've never seen a project, and maybe this is just me, I've never seen anything, including the demos that we've done at Epic for the last 8.5 years I've been there. I've never seen anything that comes easy, that is amazing. Amazing stuff is because you've got aspirations to do something a little bit crazy, you don't totally know how to do it, and then you have something that's special. So there's always this tendency. There's another thing that used to drive me crazy when I used to work on that side of visual effects was the bidding process, because you know the studio's only got so much money. You know that the artists are going to do their best to protect themselves, to make sure it's a sane schedule and a sane amount of work. And then it all gets thrown out the window anyway. Well, they don't have that much money, so we can't do it for that. You're going to have to do it for this. It's a very complex process. Don't like it.
I don't think I've ever submitted a bid which didn't require 2 rewrites before I felt good for it to go. Because it's gambling. You're throwing the dice every time.
Yeah, and also I think one of the things that's hurt technology innovation in the visual effects industry is that, you know, the margins are so tight nowadays, the scale is so huge, the appetite for errors or, you know, mistakes is super slim, and I think that really quashes innovation. Yeah, you know, I'm pretty impressed that, you know, I occasionally see stuff that I'm like, oh my God, look what they did. They did some really crazy stuff, and they pulled it off. But usually nowadays, that doesn't tend to come from the biggest studios. That comes from the little ones that just didn't know any better. And then you know, went down a path, they're like, oh shit, we cut the bridges. We can't go back. Innovation, that's what I like.
Yeah, and speaking of innovation too, like from your roots, proprietary software was a necessary thing. Like, you know, you have prisms, you have wavefront, you know, there are packages coming out, but a lot of the time, especially R&H as a good example, who even in the early 2000s was still using a lot of proprietary tools. How important do you think it is for a lot of creatives to have some kind of coding ability or understanding, at least, so that way they can script themselves out of a problem or write a little tool?
I think on the cutting edge, if you're trying to do anything new, I think having a technical understanding of what's happening under the hood, or just a really, really good friend who's willing to spend the time to explain to you, or you can fire ideas off, because you can be a pure artist and work very, very well with a technologist. But, you know, it's good to get some grounding. It's good to sort of get through some fundamentals of computer graphics and lighting. It will help. It will help you be better. A little bit of scripting. You know, when Yannick and myself were doing visual effects stuff, you know, 30 years ago, the compositing system was a scripting engine. We didn't have any UI for the stuff. It was basically writing code to do, you know, Muppets Christmas Carol was coded basically for the visual effects. So I think it's useful. I think it's worth trying and persevering. You know, I think we're lucky in the engine that the engine team, Nick Whiting and the team, put these blueprints in years ago, which is sort of a visual. It's like a node graph for programming logic within game. That actually helps people find things more accessible. And that's one thing that I've learned as well over the years, is that a visual programming language is actually, you know, it's an order of magnitude more acceptance of a node-based visual programming language than a scripting language for your average artist. Doesn't mean that not all artists can't get their head around the more technical side of things, but I think it's important, it's worth persevering, and it's worth understanding the fundamentals of light. I think it really does help. You know, the amount of times that I spent in my visual effects career working with compositors and taking the 3,000 node flow graphs and turning it into a tenth of that because you actually, let's look at what you're trying to do. Let's look at the maths. This is how a mat works. This is how pre-multiplication works. It does help understanding the fundamentals. Although just like in pure art with a paintbrush, some artists have no understanding of what light really does. They just have an intuition on how to paint. I think it'll help your career. And I think that the proof of this is that if you look at Mannix / Mass Illusions, you look at all the artists that grew up on the Matrix movies and What Dreams, almost every one of them that was good ended up being a supervisor, and really good supervisors. So
what if you want to give like a quick roadmap of Magic Illusions all the way through to Mannix to Escape, like that whole kind of journey? Because obviously you guys had Mannix and then things kind of shifted and you moved into Escape as kind of the next iteration to do the sequels, right?
Yeah, so Mass Illusions, Mannix, it's one continuum really, a lot of the same people. Escape was, Warner's felt for the second and third movie that it would be better for them. I think it was just so expensive, so complex. I think Warner's felt more secure by having their own studio to carry out just their movies. And if you actually look at the history, Escape lasted, we did one more or two more movies after that, both in parallel, Constantine and Catwoman we did together. That's right, I almost blanked it because I wasn't Catwoman.
Repressed.
But it was pretty much the same crew, like, because it was such a specialist recipe. I think we were open for like 5 years, was how long it went for. And then at the end of The Matrix, we were going to do Superman, and for some reason, studio politics, something happened that meant that we couldn't do Superman, even though we were the best in the world at doing digital humans at the time. You got to work, it's probably is it the one that got made in Australia, the Bryan Singer?
In 2004, I got stuck on Superman for way too many years, because 2004 it was going to be McKay that was directing it, and then that's right. We helped on the suit and started doing some digital double stuff for that. Anyhow. So he didn't share with anyone that he had a massive phobia. I forget the exact name for
Flying.
it.
He couldn't fly.
US. Yeah. Well, he could fly. He couldn't leave the United States.
Oh.
So that was like he was in Burbank on the tarmac with the Warner Brothers execs about to fly to Fox Studios in Sydney, and that's when he's like, oh yeah, like I can't do this. And so then I went through rewriting because Singer wanted to rewrite it all, and it kind of went to, 2 years later, it all happened. Tom Siegel was the DP, Singer, and
where were you? Were you at Photon or something? Where were you working then?
I was working on set actually with Frantic as more of a ambassador, or a liaison, I guess, for Warner Brothers and Frantic. So I was working on set for that film. I'd been working in LA for a long time. I came back to Australia around that time, so it was just good timing to jump on that show. And it was fun. It's just, I've seen it twice and that was kind of too much for me. So, but it was a fun project for sure.
Yeah, that's good. That's cool. We were meant to do that. That didn't come through because of director changeover, and I think Brian already had a relationship with Sony ImageWorks, which is it's fine. It's just, things happen, yeah.
So we did the plane crash, if I recall.
Yeah. We just disbanded. Honestly, I almost went to Valve. I believed in video game technology and real-time graphics all my life. Even back. If you go back to the first Matrix, the sets, the bullet time sets, we had real-time renders written in GL, not even OpenGL, I think at the time, that George had done for us to help basically pre-visualize the moves and stuff. So it had been something where, like, eventually, because we're all computer graphics nerds, it's going to happen in real time. We had Onyxes, going back to working on a movie called Event Horizon, which I guess just had its 25th anniversary. We designed the gravity drive. That's the central thing that propels the Event Horizon. We designed that in an Onyx with a real-time simulation. We could spin the gravity drive because they had this problem on that movie. This is really going back in the past. First, they couldn't work out a construction technique to make something look cool, and then they wanted to have a somewhat psychedelic look when it spun, and they just couldn't work it out. They were using, set builders that had worked on Lawrence of Arabia, and they're chopping everything with wood, and there's no maths involved. And we come along with a big Silicon Graphics Onyx machine and programmed a bunch of geometry procedurally and got a look that Paul Anderson liked. And when they're like, that's it. And then they're like, now we have to build it. And there's not 3D printing. So Dan Papone, so a lot of the same people. He works at Epic now. Dan basically worked out all the maths to teach a set builder on how to build this crazy geometric structure. It's awesome. So that was the beginning of real time for us. Getting into it at Lucasfilm. So what happened there was, we did a couple of experiments. While I was there, in between movies, Lucasfilm had this engine called oh my God, Ronin engine. The Force Unleashed was on our proprietary engine that actually Xeno, aka
Oh God, don't say that word around me.
No,
Continue
aka
repressing me
Stagecraft. Xeno was their internal tool, and what they did is they built a game engine where the underlying runtime for the graphics and stuff was super proprietary stuff called Ronin, and then they'd use Xeno as the front end, which worked. They shipped 2 games on it, and I'm like, we have this mocap stage. We can now process mocap in real time. I'm telling you, there's a new way of making films that is really director friendly. And we did a bunch of experiments, and then ILM sort of added to it when they were working with Michael Bay and other directors. But I was pretty hungry for doing real time stuff. I'm like, it's the future. And visual effects is getting, I don't like these massive bids that you have to do 20 times and no budget. Right. And when you talk about writing new code to solve a problem, people look at you like you're crazy. So I'm like, can I move to LucasArts? And I was really lucky in that I'd met a guy that used to run Epic Shanghai. Epic used to have an office in Shanghai. Well, we have now, but they're 2 different things. But this guy, Paul Megan, had come to work at LucasArts and run LucasArts for George. And I'd met him a few years earlier when I'd been at Digital Domain. And at ILM, I'm like, look, let me do that transfer. And because I think I can bring what I know and what we've learned in making movies all these years inside a computer into video games. Before that, I mentioned Digital Domain. There was a period where I'd left ILM because I just was missing the hardcore technology to solve visual effects problems. I did Poseidon. I don't know if you ever saw that. Wolfgang passed away the other day, actually.
Yeah, I read that.
Yeah, he was a very, very nice guy. And that movie it had to be ray traced. They wanted to do a full CG ship. They wanted all this water. It had to be ray traced. It had to be global illumination. And trying to get that through was actually quite hard. It was a quite hard sell because they were very formally RenderMan rasterizing pipeline. And I'm like, you know what? RenderMan at the time, it's fantastic at ray tracing now, but at the time, 2006 wasn't very good. And I'm like, look, well, let's use Mental Ray. So we did Mental Ray. We did all this fluid state simulation. It was a lot of technology. It just was a little bit too uphill battle for me. Studios, you could tell the studios didn't really want to spend money on technology anymore. I don't mean ILM. I mean Warner's. Yeah. So I'm like, yeah, I don't know. I think maybe my time with visual effects is over. I'm going to go to, and my friends were going there, Cliff Plumer and Mark Miller, and they're like, they're going to do a real-time division. Do you want to run it? And I'm like, well, I'm talking to Valve. I was thinking of going to work at Valve. They've got this source filmmaker thing. I think that would be fun. No, they'll do the same thing at Digital Domain. Turns out that didn't really get much of an opportunity to do it. We did a Thundercats test, and that was pretty much it.
I think Simon Eves, hopefully I'm not getting him in trouble, but I think he showed me some stuff from Thundercats from back in the day.
You know, the director, Jerry O'Flaherty, who incidentally is an ex-Epic person. He was the art director on Gears of War 1. He was the director on that piece. It's on the internet. People can find it. We wrote, the idea originally was we were going to use Unreal Engine, it would have been 3 at the time to do it. And it was still too much of a void in 2006 when we did that thing, 2007, just too much of a void between game engine technology and visual effects. So we wrote our own custom renderer. And the idea is we would come back and then would try and see if we could get Unreal Engine up to the specs of where you could do more movie-like content, which actually, it does tell a story. So beam forward to finishing my last movie, Super 8 with JJ, going to LucasArts, we basically I'm like, okay, let's do what we were going to do at Digital Domain and could never get the chance. Dust off, and at that point, Lucasfilm had left the proprietary engine and moved on to Unreal Engine 3, and they were working on a couple of cool projects. One of them was called Star Wars 1313, and the original plan for that, it was going to be a PlayStation 3 title, and they weren't even going to try next gen. And I'm like, do you want this game to be good? Yeah. Well, if you want it to be good, you need a team that's really reaching for the stars. They really have to have passion that the thing they're going to build is going to be the greatest thing ever. So let me take a small team and see what we can do in getting Gen 4, PlayStation 4 visuals up and running in a more ILM-like way or visual effects-like way in Star Wars 1313. So that's where that demo came in. And really, when you look at it, we had a bunch of people came over from ILM, Jerome, Polying, John Plateau, Polying, even hardcore TDs, Hayden that was responsible for ambient occlusion at ILM was part of the team. Like we had a ton of ILM people come in that wanted to change, and we basically implemented ambient occlusion and the way we do the light probes at ILM prior to them going into full global illumination ray tracing, the way that ILM Classic used to work. And we implemented all that stuff in Unreal Engine, and the result was 1313. And we're like, it was good. And I'm like, that's it, never going back. The future of entertainment is making assets once, making it across all platforms, and using the same core technology, and not penalizing people to have iterations. As you know, in a big visual effects movie, if a director changes their mind, you're like, oh God, no, please. Right. Where actually it benefits the movie usually to change your mind. When you see something that's not good, doesn't tell the story properly, then not everybody can be Steven Spielberg in their ability to project and see the future of what their pixels are going to be like. So it's better for the movie to change them pixels and do a new shot if it's not working. And that's what I love about what we're doing with real time now.
I think it's awesome. Like, kind of curious, like for you, as you decided to migrate from LucasArts, let's say, over to Epic, like, what was the selling point for you in terms of the vision? Like for you, like what got you really excited? Obviously, you could see that that's the future, but just kind of pivoting from one industry to the other, like what was the deciding point for you to go to Epic?
For at least 2 decades, I'd seen that at some point the real-time computer graphics business would overtake the traditional software business because Moore's law says it's going to do eventually, and at some point you hit photorealism with software rendering, and there's no more photoreal than photoreal, and we're getting close on the visual effects side, the traditional side. We're getting very, very close now at this point. In fact, if anything, I think innovation has died. I think there's more work, and I think actually some of the amazing work that's being done in the AI field by NVIDIA and all the other academic people will help fix that last 5%. You've already seen the deep fake stuff make a massive difference to digital doubles. But it was obvious that, okay, the problems are almost solved in visual effects, traditional visual effects with software rendering. The graphic stuff is getting more and more powerful. Epic has an open piece of software that's available to anybody, and that Tim's philosophy at that point when I was talking to them was like, we're just going to give it out for free for anybody to use, and we'll only make money out of it when they sell a product that uses the engine in direct consumer engagement. And I'm like, the potential for this thing to change the entertainment industry across the board was so clear. And I'd seen even with what we were doing at Lucasfilm, but even post Disney acquisition, you could see that it was going to change everything. And I'm like, well, do I do it here in a proprietary fashion that I can't really share? All I can do is share it with audiences. I can't share it with other creators. Or do I go and pioneer this or help be part of pioneering this at Epic that really is about giving this to millions and millions of people in a way that is so transparent and honest? And I know it sounds like I'm doing a big advert for Epic, but anamorphic depth of field. We needed anamorphic squeeze on depth of field. We haven't put it in the engine. It hasn't been a super priority for us, but I know everybody wants it in the cinematic field. So this week I got one of our graphics people that was kindly offered to help out. And last night he checked in into GitHub, his code changes, and straight away the community lights up. Hold on, we just saw this anamorphic. We've not even fully tested it ourselves, and yet people are using it in the outside world. And it's that connection to pretty much every artist on the planet at this point. The amazing work that the team has done with Lumen and Nanite sort of bridges the gap between the two industries. And it's just, it's awesome. It is so obvious why I would come here, because I just didn't feel that I could push things as quickly as I could here. I think we've done a great job. What we do need is more creatives like Jon Favreau that really have a vision of the kind of storytelling they want to take and tell and how they want to make it. But that'll happen. You can see right now there's a whole new generation of filmmakers that are going to be wired completely different from the previous generation.
Chatting with Aaron Sims the other day, and he's because he did a short film called The Eye Calantech, which they created in 6 weeks, which again is insane. But I love the fact that you've got a real visual effects studio. Real as in, I love the fact that there's indie people and people who just grow up now having access to the software rather than needing to find it in the dark areas of the web hiding somewhere. But it's just exciting to see people who have experience as a storyteller who now go in, and he did his short film, but as a proof of concept in a way to say, well, what if I go make a feature film now? And just to see that is the direction things are going, where it's not only can we do it for cheaper, but we also, all the things that usually would hinder you, being real time, it means that you can innovate, you can knock things out a lot quicker, you can collaborate because the workspace is built for collaborative artists.
It's very easy to have a distributed team because of the way that the engine's built to support that from day one. But I think that, he made that thing in under 2 months with a pretty small team. Yeah. We do tons of cinematic work at Epic, and I wouldn't consider myself a director by any stretch of the imagination. It's a job I never want, but how we make stuff together by just iterating and looking at something and going, it's not good enough, the pacing's not working, let's just change the game. We can do it all instantly, means that actually it gives people a chance to sort of break out into storytelling that they would have not been an easy thing to have done with the traditional process. And obviously you need to have a point of view. You can't just keep throwing things at the wall and seeing what sticks. But just that extra ability to iterate quickly really does make a difference. And Aaron's been fantastic all the way through. Like, it's funny, when we first met him was probably like 2.5-3 years ago, and he was going to show us some engine stuff, and I'm like, okay, here we go, let's see. And they got the main creature out of Stranger Things running in the engine. It looked really good. Yeah. And I'm like, wow, okay, good. It was good testimony to us that actually the tools that we're making are accessible enough that if people are willing to invest the time, they can actually make really great stuff. Yeah. One of the things that I think is going to really change the game over the next couple of years is we have a path tracer in the engine, so you can go into path trace mode. And almost all primary functions of the rendering systems of the engine now are going to be supported in the path tracer. So as a visual effects studio, if you're a little bit worried that it's not quite the quality depth of field I need, or not quite the shadow finesse that we need, or the light balance, you can go to path trace mode and get that shot out. But we're going to really make a big effort to keep the path tracer and the rasterizer very, very convergent so that there's no surprises. But it's exciting. To be honest, there's more possibilities than we can even cope with ourselves. It's really has taken a life of its own.
It's kind of like back in the day for a lot of filmmakers, you'd have the Super 8 camera that they borrowed from their dad or whatever, and that's kind of the cliche story that I've especially heard so many guests talk about, especially feature film directors on this podcast. But that's just it now, where it's like you're creating something that's available for everyone to enable everybody to be able to go out there. And there's no excuse not to be able to pick up a computer and start making your idea, how crude it might be, but you can get it out the door, and then from there, the next step, keep iterating on that and getting better. Whereas before, what's the paywall that you have to go over to be able to just get access to the software to do what you need to do?
Yeah, I have a friend, Wes Ball. He's a director. He
was on the podcast a few months ago.
He's awesome at Unreal Engine, and you look at what he must have done to do his previous short. Unbelievable amount of work to do that the old-fashioned way. Unbelievable amount of work. And now, because the game engine is built to stream content, and you can build levels in ways that you can move anywhere, and they're built for navigation. And let's move this around and change this light. It's pretty like. Yeah, I bet he wish he could be back and use Unreal Engine to have done that. I think it would have been 10 times faster. I bet.
I mean, one thing he said that kind of stuck with me was that, because obviously he was doing a lot of stuff with Weta for a film that didn't quite pan out, but he was mentioning how, like, traditionally, let's say with location scouting, you would have to fly a team over somewhere and go through a lot of places. The place that you liked, then you need to go and scan it all and kind of do a lot of shot tests on the spot. But these days, you could literally just hire someone, let's say in New Zealand, give them the location they found on Google Maps, they go and do a photogrammetry pass and then kick it over to him, and then he can start doing previs without ever leaving his Los Angeles apartment. So in a lot of ways, like, all these tools, all this innovation allows you to do so much more without needing the tech, without needing the people and physically having to go to all those locations.
Yeah, and one thing we're seeing as well now is that with the production designers being sort of running these virtual art departments in the engine, is that they're starting to design worlds that actually, in movies traditionally, if you have a real location, it's a real location, yeah? But when you build stuff for a visual effects movie, you don't really pad out the world. And what we're starting to see is that they really make stuff, because they can pop into VR, look around the thing before they even build anything physically. And we're just seeing them do so much better job of world building that they're almost turning into game designers. Not to disrespect the art of gameplay and the effect it has on a level, and the space and the sizing and how things need to be made for jumping and crawling or whatever you do in your game. These things have to be considered as well. But it's surprising to see people filling out big spaces, and they get sort of addicted to building worlds. I almost wish George was making movies again, because I think that if he made a movie in a more video game centric way in terms of the world building, I think he'd love it, because that was what he was always trying to do, is build a universe that people believed in, and you really can do that with a game engine.
I think it's exciting right now, especially with AI, especially just because, let's say 10 years ago, we'd always be talking about where AI or where certain technology is going. And I think that it's exciting right now that we are actually in that space at the moment, where suddenly a lot of things are becoming a lot easier, faster, and we're actually getting to experience a lot of this technology that before was a what if, and now it's every single week. Like, I can't not go on 2-minute papers on YouTube every day or two.
It's fascinating.
Yeah, it's amazing to kind of see what stuff is coming out there, and even certain things like Nerf, which, I don't feel gives you the accuracy you need for certain things, but it's a stepping stone to where it will be, even a few months from now. It's not even years away.
It reminds me of Dennis Muren a little bit, is that, we spent the last, 40 years of computer graphics now trying to emulate reality perfectly. Yeah. And they doing a whole forest, a whole jungle, and making it look totally real in one shot. You still need compositors to do that, because the lighting complexity of what happens with light moving through leaves and bouncing around is super, 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 super complicated. But the human brain does not see an image as a bunch of little molecules or triangles or whatever. It does not. That's not the way we store things. We store things in very impressionistic, sort of pattern-based ways. And then the thing that I love about the AI stuff right now is it's sort of giving us an insight into kind of how we see things. The fact that it's able to you're like, that does look real. Well, does it actually totally understand Tom Cruise's face? No, it doesn't. But it's able to abstract the stuff that sort of makes it look real, almost in a way that a really great painter has this intuition as to what looks real, even though what they do when you look at the structure, it's like nothing like the way we would render it. And I think it's going to help us sort of explore the boundaries of human perception and what is real and what is not real. Because I think that, myself included, we've gone to unbelievable lengths of trying to completely emulate Mother Nature, and actually the human brain doesn't analyze things that way anyway. So we'll see where it takes us.
I like that take on things. And I'm curious too, kind of looping around, I guess, like while we're on the subject of AI, Matrix Awakens. So going full circle with that, like, how did that project come up with Epic? You having all this experience previously with the Matrix films and working with Lana and Lily, like, how did that project end up on your lap?
Okay, so ever since I've been at Epic, I've been not only responsible for working with the engine team and helping a little bit on some of the games that we do. I've run this special projects team that does our demos, and sometimes we do them in collaboration with third parties, sometimes we just do them ourselves, sometimes we do a lot of the work ourselves and just have the third party lend the IP. But every year they've got more and more big and bold and crazy and spectacle. And it's always been a big joke with Tim Sweeney and myself. He's like, okay, how are you going to beat that? How are you going to beat that? And I found myself 2 years ago having dinner with John Gader and Lana Wachowski. And she, out of the blue, she tells us, hey, I'm going to make another Matrix. I've got an idea that's come to me. She actually had a really sad set of events happen in her and her sister's life that sort of like kickstarted the beginning of the story that became the new Matrix movie, Matrix Resurrections. Anyway, first of all, she's like, okay, so just pack in what you're doing, boys, and we're going back to into the Matrix. And I'm like, no, I can't do that. I really love my job, and I think I'm helping the film business more than I ever would do working on just one movie, and helping the game business at the same time. So I'm like, look, I tell you what, we'll work with one of your visual effects vendors to do some stuff that you want to do in Unreal Engine. And as a sort of a favor, if Warner Brothers are into it, and we can't ignore the importance of Warner Brothers, and Sarnoff, who was running Warner Brothers at the time, and Jason Kilar was so gracious, to give us to give a third party an IP. Now, admittedly, we've on that project, there's probably 10 of us that worked on the original trilogy, so we know the brand and the IP better than they do. But I said, Lana, can I do a demo? Because I think that we are on the cusp of movies and games, the blurring. And even though Lana herself doesn't play that many video games that much anymore, although during the second and third Matrix, whenever they would get pissed off on set, they would go and play Halo on, what is it, legendary mode? Is that what it's called? The hardest version of Halo?
I'm not, yeah.
But she don't play them that much anymore. But Karen, Lana's wife, is super video game player. And she's like, well, what do you think? I'm like, yeah, that'd be cool. Let's see if we can blur the lines. So I'm like, all right, okay, let's do it. And it was going to be a GDC demo. COVID happened. GDC 2021 didn't seem like that was even feasible. So we're like, okay, let's just let it cook a little bit longer. And to be honest, we sort of snowballed that thing. You know, it was in production for probably a year and a half, I think, with us. But we just wanted to make it better and better and better. And then I'm like, look, this is only super authentic. Like, how do you blow away the launch video for Unreal Engine 5, which, you know, went super viral, tens of millions of video views and stuff? It's by making something that not only is technologically awesome, has great visuals, great stories, appeals to a wide fan base, and they can play at home. So we made this demo so it actually runs on a PlayStation 5 and an Xbox Series X, and thanks to Microsoft, a Series S as well. And Lana was into it. John consulted. Lana wrote the script. I think what we finally made was not exactly what Lana thought it was going to be, but she was cool about it, and Keanu and Carrie-Anne were cool about it. Because we had to, you know, it's got gameplay. It's not just linear. Yeah? It's got, you play this character that is, you know, learning how to take on agents, or how futile it is to take on agents. It's got really good gameplay. And, you know, have you had a go at it yet? If you find somebody who's got a PlayStation, who's got it, it's pretty awesome because it's different every time you play.
I haven't. I just want to say that, I haven't had a chance. And I was actually just thinking about it earlier today, like I got to do this. Part of me shifting careers right now back into film is I'm gonna have a bit more time on my hands, so I'm definitely gonna have to get my head into it. Plus, that's already been the reference for a few feature films that are coming up that keep referencing the Matrix City. So it's funny, feature films, they keep saying we want to create a massive scale city very similar to the Unreal 5 demo, which says so much about, you know, where things are going, that's where people look for inspiration and reference these days.
It's cool. You know, we gave out all the sample content, so that city and all the Houdini stuff, and we worked together with Side Effects to educate the Houdini artists on how to replicate what we did. So yeah, it should. I think there's a good start out there.
What were some of the biggest challenges with that? Because I always think of this when you know, you've got a new feature film or project coming in that's got those oh shit moments where, you know, it's like, how are we going to pull this off? And obviously, when you're working within your own tech, you kind of know the constraints somewhat. But I'm curious for you, like, knowing that you want to push the limits of what you could do, and also make sure PS5 compatibility, things like that. What were the things that were kind of like, okay, how the heck are we going to pull that off?
It's funny. The hardest part, honestly, and I hope my team don't disagree with this, but the hardest part was creatively, because Lana wrote one thing and we used a bunch of it, but we changed a bunch of it as well. Because at the end of the day, the meat of the demo is not the introduction of Keanu and Carrie-Anne. They're meant to just go, well, what if you can't tell the difference? What happens when you can make a virtual world? The real meat was, hey, this is still meant to be for video gamers. So there's meant to be a shoot 'em up action sequence, and trying to fit these things together. That was very hard. We do something that our users don't need to do. It was Unreal Engine 5 was not totally ready for prime time while we were making that demo. So lots of crashes, lots of bug reports, lots of functionality. You go to dailies and, you know, you're in real time. So we're changing a lot of code. So something that was working totally fine, one day you come in the morning after, you play it and you're like, oh my God, what's Keanu's hair? It's gone. Or why are all the agents flying up in the sky? Or what happened to the AI cars? And things just break, because when you build real-time content that is truly real-time, so that's not the same as if you use the engine to make a movie and you're burning out video, then you can be, okay, well, that was the old version of the engine. It doesn't matter. We got the video. We're happy. We final the shot. If you're trying to have it live cut, shot after shot after shot, make sure that the camera is teleported to the right part of the city, because in one frame from now, you're in a totally different part of the world. So all that geometry, so trying to get the performance to work, to get it to flow as we move through the city, to even build a city that was good for the action sequences, it's really hard. Even though I talk a lot about, hey, the intersection between these two art forms is really cool, it's very hard. It's more hard than just them by themselves. But I can just see that there's new creators and new storytellers that are getting their heads around it. But perf was hard, storytelling was hard, engine being very early in its development, and our wonderful engineers making stuff for us as we go, so we're putting the thing down. So you're constantly like, well, what do we work on this week? Can we do the car AI? No, we need to redo the physics system, so we can't work on that. And it's a bit like old school visual effects when you didn't know how you were going to do anything. Yeah, before you could just use Arnold and just click a button and oh yeah, this many samples and it does its thing. Digital humans are really hard, no matter who you are. And there's no ability to do deep fake because they are pixels that have to be rendered in a PlayStation 5 or an Xbox Series X or S. So there's no cheating on the computer graphics. We can't do a layer of deep fake over the top. So getting that to look great, to get an animation solve, and also it's a pretty abstract, the way we did the performance capture, there's some of it's head mounting cameras, but some of it's in this fantastic 4D scanner that Vlad at Trilateral has. But the challenge there for an actor is he's not really looking at the place he needs to look, and there's a bunch of overrides. It was getting the digital human great, hard, then getting the young Keanu, that was hard. Getting likeness of an actor, and you see loads of companies doing it, and I don't think when people read Cinefx, or actually Cinefx is gone now, or Mike's podcast or whatever, I don't think they quite realize how hard it's, lots of people can do great art and do an Arnold rendering. Oh, that's a digital likeness. Getting it to move, getting it to work in all lighting conditions, getting the hair dynamics to work. Oh my God, is it hard? It's still the hardest thing in visual effects. Deepfake helps take a lot of we got it 90%, it's fine, we'll deepfake over the top of it. But man, to get it in pure computer graphics, very hard. And we even had models from Matrix Reloaded. Fortunately, because enough of us worked on that movie, I'm able to go to the archives, and Warner's were very gracious. We pulled back the old models, even the universal capture stuff with the 5 cameras running, we pulled it back. But it was hard. Even then, the likeness didn't match young Keanu, and it took us a long time to get it. We got it. We have this amazing modeler, Adam Scott, that we even had to move him off it for a bit. It's like, you need to palette cleanse, almost like the Dennis Muren. I'm in dailies and I'm like, hey, Dennis Muren taught me this thing, which I'm sure everybody knows, except for I didn't know it when he told us. Mirror. Oh my God, the shot's brand new. Yeah. For 5 seconds, it's going to be fresh, and you're going to see the defects, and then you'll not be able to see them anymore. But it was tough.
No, that's so cool. And again, it's so interesting to see what, go back X amount of years, like 20 years, like what was possible then, and now looking at the challenge being real time. Where do you see it being, let's say that Matrix test 5 years from now, if you were to revisit it, obviously excluding any roadmaps or things like that that are more specific, but like just in terms of where you think real time is going to be 5 years from now in terms of tackling something like that? Like, do you see photoreal characters? Do you see how
I think we are collectively as an industry going to cross the uncanny valley in the next 5 years. Really, I've been saying this for years, so maybe my 5 years is a bit optimistic, but we're getting so close. And if you're on an NVIDIA card, you've got, and even the new AMD cards, you've got AI hardware in there, so you can do deepfakes over the top. So I think uncanny valley for faces is going to get fixed. I think we've still got a lot of work to do with animation technology, and the team is doing a ton of work for in-game animation. Although it's quite different. When you're controlling a character, your brain's requirements for an interactive experience are quite different from a cinematic experience. So it's, and at some point you should talk to Naughty Dog, if you haven't, about how they make their games, because they're really trying to go for maximum cinematic feel. And it's actually hard if you're getting a character to look good to your eye, yet feel good and look human is really hard. I'll be honest, I haven't seen any game totally nail it. There's always a gamification if you just analyze the animation without feeling it, while you're playing the thing. So I think there's a ton of work to be done there. I think AI is going to revolutionize the last 5% of computer graphics. So I think that we'll get to a point, hopefully within 5 years, and at worst 10 years, where we really have solved all the rendering problems and we can produce damn convincing images. The exciting stuff that I want to see is more, and I'm not just talking about AR, like more connections between the real and the virtual world. You're playing a game, something's happening in the physical world at the same time as you're playing a game, you're contributing, you're collaborating. I think there's a lot of interesting space there. How we experience performance art and social art, I think is going to change dramatically. I look at what people watch now, in the evening, like Fox with the Masked Singer and stuff. People love that stuff. And I'm like, that in the metaverse could be amazing. And the ability of individuals to partake in mass entertainment is incredible. And on the visual effects side, if we're talking about visual effects, I think what's going to happen is it's going to be interesting. I think the in-camera visual effects stuff will get so far. You know, we're gonna improve the engine visual capabilities. The screens are going to get better. They're going to turn into light field displays at some point. But I feel that there'll be a point, you know, we have this problem is they're not very bright right now, and the colors aren't really great, so they're not awesome for DPs. That has to get fixed, but that's nothing that we can do about that. That's really about it's about the display manufacturers, the camera manufacturers, and then maybe a little bit of AI augmentation. I think that, you know, Paul Debevic is starting to experiment. Hey, if you have an image with slightly crappy light, can AI make that look like it should have done if you shot it with good light? And I think there's something there that'll happen. But I think what's going to happen as well is that the ability for a computer to distinguish what were the pixels that were fed to the LED volume during the photography, remove them and replace them with better versions of them pixels that don't have the focus at the plane of the screen, that have better lens effects. I think that through the fact that we record everything we send to the display device, and we track the camera and all this new generation of AI stuff, I think we're going to find post-production it's not going to totally go away, because people always want to polish pixels. I don't see, if you give them the ability to do that, they will polish pixels. So I think there's going to be a new type of post-production come up that's sort of AI assisted, that allows you to improve over what you were able to get on the day. But taking away the mundane stuff like the roto and the green screens and all the stuff that is very ultra labor intensive and not that creative. Although quite frankly, I know some of the most creative people I know are roto artists, but I think we're going to see evolution there, or maybe even a revolution about how we think about post-production. And then I think then post-production teams are literally going to go with the production and the editor and the director. They may be sat at home or sat in a studio, but I think that they will always feel very connected. And I'm hoping that directors, instead of just feeling that they've got this one person as the visual effects supervisor or conduit, they feel they've really got a whole crew out there. Obviously, you don't want free-for-all, you're a supervisor, you don't want the total free-for-all, but I think it'll become a more collaborative process because of the technology evolution.
I'm really excited for that. One thing I was going to mention is that I was chatting with Doug Roble. We're on a panel together with NVIDIA and Google a few months ago. I kept telling him I'm easily the dumbest person in the room at that given time, but he was talking about the performance capture that they were doing at DD when he was there before he went to Facebook, and he made a statement which I thought was quite polarizing, which was that in the next 5 years he imagines that no one's going to be keyframing anymore. It's going to be, you know, looking at your phone, doing the performance into your phone and capturing that performance in real time to your characters. And it's a bold statement to make, but it's one of those things that is interesting to see, like, where things are all headed. You know,
I think the motion input from consumer level devices, for even in your games, you know, we have a cinematic system in Fortnite, a replay system. It'd be great if people could just make their own little dances and emotes that are their own and they film them. I think that's going to happen. I think it'll get pretty good over the next 5 years. I don't disagree there, but I think Doug is applying a slightly nerdy view to the artistic. I think there'll always be the need to tweak things and have an artistic augmentation. They may be totally different tools from the traditional keyframing, but I think the idea that it's just a human body and it's all algorithms, I think sort of underestimates how important the creative process is. But, you know, I made that leap. I started as an engineer. I've never been as smart as Doug, but when you start making stuff and you're responsible for the creative output as well, you realize that there's a magic there, and it's not all technology. Technology is it's a new type of oil paint, a new paintbrush. It's a new tool that allows the artist to create. So I think they're going to completely revolutionize over the next 5-10 years. But I don't think that, you know, artistic endeavors where somebody's putting in some blood, sweat, and tears to make something cooler or better, I don't think that's going to ever go away. That's why everybody gets so excited about all the AI art stuff now. And I'm like, it's a good tool. I think if we're not putting any human imagination or human experiences on top of that, I think it's going to be a very sad, boring world, because it's all going to look like I look at it as convolution right now. It's that this mixed up with this, mixed up with this.
Well, there's no direction. I mean, you are giving it some direction into GPT-3, and it kind of interprets that and does something with it. But I think it's the same way you look at even like fluid sims or global illumination, radiosity, like all these things that go back 20-25 years ago. It's kind of hit a button and let it cook for a couple of days or whatever, and it wasn't like you really had too much creative control. But bit by bit, like the computer's always been seen as a cheat compared to, you know, doing it manually, things like that. But bit by bit, it's just the tools become part of your tool set. And I do think things like DALL-E or Mid Journey are going to be things that maybe down the line, like they become more verbose. You have more input rather than just a command line. You actually can circle an area, and the same way of Photoshop, you can do content aware.
Yeah, I think it's a tool. I think it's a tool to help to aid discovery, and it's that random number generator we talked about earlier. Where an idea that you wouldn't have necessarily had pops into your head from it. I just don't think it should be where you end. I think it should be inspiration for, okay, that's great. Now how do we add something that nobody's ever seen before? Because you can see, you just look at everything looks kind of similar. You can tell whether you can also get.
I'm hoping it becomes more for mood boards, things like that. It's not really part of the final process. Looking at all the stuff that's being done in filmmaking and game development, like what are some of the things with real-time or specifically Unreal Engine that you've seen that are kind of take you by surprise, that are quite innovative and completely different to the standardized stuff that everyone else is doing?
Every day, every week we get something that we'd never seen before. You know, years ago, NASA training their astronauts for the International Space Station was like, what? You're doing what? That's awesome. So there's loads and loads of stuff. One of the most awesome stories that we've had is there's an artist, quite a secretive artist called Cooler, that at the very beginning of Unreal Engine, going on its journey of being very accessible to everybody, being effectively open source, and heading towards being free, this artist put out this sort of ArchViz. It was like the first ArchViz thing, seven and a half years ago. I think it was August 12, 2014. The only reason I remember that date is my wedding anniversary, so it's easy to remember the date. It was first epic, and it went viral. And we're like, oh my God, look how good the pixels are we can make with the engine now, and what could we make better? But then he's like, we're like, hey, do you want to do some stuff for us, like promote ArchViz or do some other cool stuff? And he's like, no, I'm going to make a game. I'm going to make a video game. And I'm like, you are? Yeah, I'm going to make a video game about a cat. And that game is Stray. And it's come out and it's been a monster success. And a lot of people were like, a game about a cat, that's stupid. It's not good. It's like, I don't know. A lot of people really like cats. So, we're dog people ourselves, but that's one of the more exciting, awesome things, that this little indie developer formed a team of people and has made this mega successful thing. And his art is, motion picture quality. It was the stuff that really got visual effects companies, his early work, to like, oh my God, you can do that. So that was one of the most exciting bits.
I texted my wife, she's in Canada right now, and she's a cat person, and we'd seen things on YouTube about Stray, and then a lot of my friends are mentioning it, like, oh, it's really good. And yeah, I watched some reviews, I haven't played it, but I actually texted her like a week ago, like, hey, that cat game, apparently it's like the #1 game out there right now. Who would have thought, when you think it's just a simple concept, but there it is, like doing something innovative and having the willingness to follow through and get it out the door. I think it's amazing.
And I'm sure, we gave him one of our, before mega grants, we had these developer grants. He had a grant to help him at the beginning, but it was a super indie thing, and he persevered and he did it. So for us in the interactive space, it's like, it's the ultimate hero story. It's like, you have a dream, don't let people dissuade you from doing it, and just get on with it. And if you work hard and you have an awesome idea, there's a really good chance you can make it big. So yeah, that's one of the best moments of the last few years.
That's great. How difficult is it to keep your finger on the pulse these days with new technology, new innovations, things like that coming out, compared to like 20, 30 years ago? You get like a shareware disk of new programs, things like that on a PC magazine. But these days, like, everything is moving so quickly. Like, where do you put your attention to keep up to date with what's going on?
I pay attention to occasional blogs and internet sites that have stuff. But honestly, it's mostly my network of friends. Like, I have so many friends at so many different industries, and everybody's taken a journey since the Matrix movie. Not everybody's staying in motion pictures. It's just things. If you have a great network, you can learn stuff that's important. And there's a lot of stuff that maybe never ever becomes important that's out there, and a lot of hype. So I tend to stay away from the hype stuff and sort of rely on my network of people that have learned cool things or seen cool things. I try not to over worry about competition or taint my view of where I think the future is by looking at what other people are doing. It's funny, it's very easy to get into that trap where you just worry about the competition all the time. And I've never really done that. Just have an awesome team, believe in the team, give them a bit of slack. They won't always get it right, but they will eventually.
I love that. Again, Kim, this has been really amazing to chat. So thank you so much for taking the time. And yeah, this has been a great experience.
Cool. It was awesome to see you, Alan.